What if the very first spark of faith did not come from gods, rituals, or sacred objects, but from a single moment of fear so deep that an ancient hominin felt something watching him in the dark? Imagine the world millions of years ago. No language as we know it, no shared myths, no structured beliefs, only instinct, hunger, danger, and an overwhelming silence broken only by wind, predators, and the crack of distant storms. Yet within that silence, something new began to surface inside the mind of our earliest ancestors, something that pure biology could not fully explain. A strange awareness, a sense of presence, an internal whisper that made them look over their shoulder even when nothing visible was there. This was not religion, not yet. It was the raw seed of spirituality emerging long before tribes had names, before symbols existed, before stories shaped the world. Early hominins lived surrounded by threats they could not predict or understand. Every shadow could hide a predator. Every sudden sound could signal death. Their brains, evolving rapidly, began to connect patterns, sense danger before it appeared, and anticipate unknown forces. And when these intuitions saved lives, when a strange feeling made them move before a falling tree, or flee moments before a predator attacked, that unexplained inner voice gained power. Over generations, this intuitive whisper transformed into a force that tribes feared, respected, and followed. It was the psychological beginning of what later became belief, the idea that something unseen was guiding or warning them. What you see here is not superstition, but a cognitive revolution, the moment when consciousness began stretching toward the invisible, driven by survival, imagination, and a deep yearning to understand the world. And as this internal whisper grew stronger, it shaped behaviors, decisions, migrations, and even the emotional bonds inside the earliest groups. It created a new type of fear, a spiritual fear, where danger was no longer just physical, but also symbolic. This is the true origin of faith, not a doctrine, but a silent voice inside beings who were just beginning to realize they were more than instinct. Have you ever felt something similar, an intuition you could not explain but that pushed you to act? If this resonates with you, leave a comment sharing your experience, hit the like button to support this kind of deep exploration, and check if you are already subscribed to the channel so you do not miss the unfolding of this journey. What you will discover next might shift the way you see human origins as we follow this whisper into the next stages of our evolution. The whisper that awakened inside early hominins did not fade. It followed them into the darkness that defined their nights. When the sun disappeared and fire was still a fragile discovery, fear became a constant companion. Night was not simply the absence of light. It was a living force that swallowed the world and erased every point of reference. Predators moved silently, eyes glowed in the distance, and the boundary between real danger and imagined threat blurred completely. In this overwhelming uncertainty, the mind began to stretch beyond what it could see. The earliest humans developed an acute sensitivity to sounds, vibrations, and movements, but they also developed a sensitivity to what was not there. The night became a canvas where their minds projected meaning onto every shadow. This was not irrationality. It was adaptive perception. When survival depended on anticipating the unseen, the brain learned to fill the void with possibilities, some real, some symbolic, and some deeply spiritual. As this internal world expanded, the early hominins started forming primitive associations between natural events and invisible forces. A sudden gust of wind that arrived moments before a predator attack, a chilling silence that fell right before a storm, or the eerie sensation of being watched. From the darkness, these experiences shaped an emotional memory that passed through generations. The night taught them that existence was more mysterious than daylight suggested. It pushed them to interpret reality not only with their senses, but also with imagination. Over time, these interpretations became shared within small groups. A child frightened by the darkness clung to the reactions of the adults, and the adults, shaped by countless near-fatal encounters, responded with caution that felt like reverence. In this subtle exchange between fear, instinct, and social learning, the idea of the invisible began solidifying as a force that guided behavior. The darkness also amplified their sense of vulnerability. In the daytime, early humans could rely on vision and movement, but at night, they depended on intuition, alertness, and the growing belief that something existed beyond the physical world. At times, these sensations saved them. At other times, they paralyzed them, either way, the psychological weight of the night became a powerful engine for spiritual thought. As they gathered around early fires, their minds replayed the threats that lurked just beyond the glow. Flames illuminated faces, but did nothing to clarify the unknown. Conversations, gestures, and shared glances formed an unspoken language of fear, and through that fear, meaning emerged. Each group learned to interpret certain sounds, patterns, or intuitions as warnings, not because they understood them, but because experience had taught them that ignoring the unknown could cost lives. And so, long before organized belief systems appeared, the night sculpted the earliest foundations of faith, forging a connection between the human mind and the invisible forces it struggled to explain. As early hominins continued to navigate the unpredictable world around them, something profound began to take shape in their minds: the transformation of basic survival instincts into the first symbolic interpretations of reality. Their daily existence was an unending negotiation between danger and opportunity, and every decision mattered. But as their cognitive abilities evolved, they stopped reacting only to immediate threats and started interpreting patterns in a way no other species did. A rustle in the bushes no longer signaled just a predator. It became a sign, a message, a shift in the environment that hinted at an unseen rhythm governing everything. This emerging pattern recognition allowed them to anticipate changes in weather, movement of animals, and even the moods within their own groups. But with this new awareness came another layer, a sense that certain events carried meaning that went beyond the physical. This was the beginning of symbolic thought. A violent storm was not simply wind and rain, it felt like anger. A sudden calm after chaos seemed like relief, as if a force had withdrawn. They began creating internal representations of danger, safety, and power, giving emotional weight to invisible phenomena. Over time, these mental associations became more complex. When a child was saved by an improbable coincidence, the event carried emotional charge that spread through the group. When a hunt succeeded after a strange sign, perhaps a bird circling unusually low or an unexpected silence, these moments were stored as meaningful patterns. The instinct that once triggered immediate reactions evolved into stories rooted not in language, but in shared memory and gesture. Even without words, they communicated these symbolic interpretations, passing experiences from one generation to the next. Ritual-like behaviors emerged naturally from these associations. Before a hunt, a group might pause, not from strategy alone, but from a subtle belief that stillness allowed them to align with forces they could not see. When danger approached, certain movements or vocalizations were repeated instinctively, becoming early forms of ritualization. These actions, born from fear and reinforced by occasional success, shaped a proto-spiritual framework long before the first myth was spoken. What began as pure survival behavior evolved into a psychological system where meaning was layered onto the world, transforming experiences into proto-symbols. A particular tree, a rock formation, or a sound in the wind could carry significance that guided behavior. These early humans were not consciously creating religion. They were navigating reality through expanding consciousness, blending instinct with imagination in a way that gradually sculpted the foundations of belief. As symbolic perception deepened within early hominin groups, something unexpected began to emerge. Individuals who interpreted these invisible patterns more intensely than others. Every tribe had at least one member who reacted faster to shifts in the environment, who sensed danger before it appeared, or who displayed an uncanny ability to predict natural events. These individuals were not chosen. They were shaped by fear, intuition, and sharpened awareness. A subtle twitch, an unusual silence, or the behavior of animals triggered responses in them that others could not fully understand. Over time, their reactions became associated with survival. When their warnings aligned with real threats, the tribe began to trust their instincts, giving these early messengers a kind of influence that no formal structure had created. Their heightened perception turned them into figures, whose presence brought both reassurance and unease. These intuitive individuals were the first to interpret the whisper within as something greater than personal instinct. When they sensed a shift in the environment, they did not merely feel danger, they felt intention. When a sudden wind swept through the trees right before a predator attack, they were the first to interpret it as a sign. Their minds interpolated invisible meaning and projected significance into natural chaos. Others observed their reactions and began attributing special perception to them, believing these individuals could communicate with forces beyond human understanding. This created an early dynamic of spiritual authority. It was not based on hierarchy, knowledge, or ritual, but on survival-driven trust in the few who seemed connected to something mysterious. Without realizing it, the tribe elevated them, granting them a symbolic power born from fear and reinforced by experience. But with influence came awe, and with awe came fear. When a messenger predicted danger and the tribe avoided it, gratitude followed. But when their warnings caused tension or demanded caution during critical moments, their presence brought uneasiness. People feared displeasing them, felt intimidated by their sensitivity, and sometimes avoided eye contact as if they were looking at someone who could see into the invisible. These early spiritual figures did not control the tribe, but their intuition shaped group decisions in ways others could not ignore. Their authority was not spoken. It was felt in the air, in the silence before a hunt, in the way people moved when danger loomed. Their presence carved the earliest outlines of what would later become spiritual leadership, a leadership rooted in perception, mystery, and the belief that some minds could hear what others could not. If any part of this idea resonates with how you imagine early human spirituality taking form, share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective adds depth to this exploration and helps expand the conversation around how intuition shaped the earliest roots of belief. As these intuitive figures gained influence within early hominin groups, the natural world around them began to take on a different psychological weight. The forces of nature were no longer random, chaotic events, but expressions of something larger, something that seemed to possess intention. A storm was not simply weather, it was a presence. Thunder rolled across the sky with a power that felt directed. When lightning struck a tree and set the landscape on fire, the tribe did not see a chemical reaction of the atmosphere. They saw a display of force, an expression of will that no individual could control. Over generations, this interpretation became part of their emotional framework. They experienced the world through layers of meaning shaped by awe, fear, and curiosity. Even without language, these associations were communicated through gestures, reactions, and patterns of behavior that reinforced a shared belief. The world was alive, watching, and capable of influencing their fate. This shift in perception created a bridge between instinct and emerging spirituality. When animals migrated in predictable cycles, or when certain plants appeared only at specific times, early humans sensed patterns that seemed too consistent to be accidental. The sun returned each morning with perfect reliability. The moon changed shape with quiet. Regularity and seasons transformed the landscape in sweeping rhythms that felt like messages carved into time itself. These predictable cycles shaped their understanding of existence. Instead of viewing nature as an indifferent force, they began seeing it as a system guided by invisible powers. Their minds, evolving rapidly, created a framework where natural events were interpreted through emotional significance. A fruitful season meant favor, a storm that scattered the tribe meant warning, and a drought that threatened survival carried the weight of dissatisfaction from forces they could not see. As these interpretations took root, they influenced every aspect of their behavior. Before crossing rivers, some individuals hesitated, sensing that water carried more than physical danger. Mountains became sacred boundaries not because of height alone, but because their immovable presence inspired reverence. Fire, once a discovery that offered safety, grew into a symbol of life and destruction, something that connected the human world to the mysterious powers of the sky. These early spiritual impressions did not form doctrine, but they shaped worldview. They taught early humans to approach their environment with both dependence and caution, believing that unseen forces influenced outcomes. This emotional bond between humans and the natural world became the foundation upon which myths, rituals, and organized belief systems would eventually be built. Long before anyone carved symbols or spoke the first sacred words, nature had already become the first teacher, guiding early consciousness toward the idea that reality extended far beyond what the senses could grasp. As the natural world took on deeper meaning in the minds of early humans, their need to respond collectively to the unknown became essential for survival. Small groups gathered around fire not only for warmth or protection, but because shared presence helped calm the growing weight of invisible fears. These gatherings marked the beginning of something transformative: early ritual behavior. At first, these actions were simple, swaying during storms, striking stones rhythmically before a hunt, or circling around a fallen member of the tribe. But these instinctive gestures gradually evolved into coordinated acts that unified the group emotionally. When a threat loomed, synchronized movements reduced panic. When food was scarce, shared expressions of hope or gratitude brought reassurance. Even without language, these collective actions created meaning, binding individuals together in a way no animal group had ever experienced. Over generations, these behaviors solidified into early forms of ritual, shaped by necessity and reinforced by outcomes. When a synchronized, chant-like hum before a hunt coincided with success, the act was remembered and repeated. When the tribe sat in silence around a fire after escaping a predator, the silence itself became sacred, a moment of reflection that felt guided by a force beyond them. These rituals did not aim to invoke deities. They were emotional tools, social technologies that helped regulate fear, strengthen bonds, and create shared identity. They became a language of unity. A gesture performed by one member quickly spread to others, and the repetition gave the group a sense of control over a world filled with uncertainty. Even small actions like placing specific stones near the fire or arranging leaves around a body became symbolic traditions that linked one generation to the next. As these ritualistic behaviors expanded, they shaped how early humans interacted with their environment. Before entering a dense forest, the group might pause in unison, as if acknowledging the unknown. When crossing dangerous terrain, they might touch the ground or a tree trunk, grounding themselves with a gesture that felt protective. These actions created psychological stability in moments of unpredictability. They also strengthened social cohesion, teaching the tribe that survival was not just individual instinct, but a collective effort supported by shared emotion and belief. The rituals became a mirror reflecting the tribe's values, fears, and hopes, even though no one consciously designed them. Through these practices, early humans found a sense of belonging that went beyond family ties. They felt part of something larger, an early spiritual identity shaped not by stories, but by experience. These ritualistic roots would later become the foundation for traditions, myths, and belief systems that defined entire civilizations. But at this stage, they were simply the first shared expressions of the human search for meaning. As early rituals strengthened group identity, something even more significant began to take shape inside these primitive societies: the rise of individuals whose presence carried an almost supernatural weight. These were not the strongest hunters or the most dominant leaders. They were the ones who felt the invisible more intensely, who interpreted natural patterns with unusual accuracy, who reacted before others sensed danger. Their minds operated in a space between instinct and emerging symbolism, and this made them stand apart. Over time, these individuals became the emotional and spiritual anchors of their tribes. People watched their reactions carefully. A subtle glance, a sudden pause, or a tense posture could shift the entire group's behavior. Without speaking, they guided decisions, and their sensitivity began shaping the tribe's perception of what the unseen world demanded. These individuals became the earliest figures of spiritual authority, long before the concept of priesthood, shamanism, or prophecy existed. Their heightened intuition was interpreted as a connection to forces beyond ordinary perception. When they sensed danger, the group moved. When they appeared calm during storms, others felt reassured. Their influence was not based on power or hierarchy, but on the belief that they understood something hidden. This distinction created a psychological divide. While the tribe relied on them, it also feared them. Their unpredictable insights disturbed the fragile order of early life. When their warnings proved accurate, they were respected. When their silence coincided with misfortune, anxiety spread. People wondered whether these figures communicated with something unseen, whether they could sense the intentions of nature or spirits. Fear and reverence intertwined, giving these individuals a presence that shaped the emotional landscape of early human spirituality. As generations passed, their role deepened. Tribes began to recognize patterns in the behaviors of these spiritually sensitive individuals. During periods of drought, illness, or conflict, they became the focus of attention. People looked to them for meaning, reassurance, or explanation. Their gestures became symbolic acts. A hand placed on the ground before crossing a dangerous area, a specific posture adopted during a storm, or a rhythmic breath held before entering a cave. All these were interpreted as hints from the unseen world. The tribe mirrored these behaviors, turning them into shared rituals. And with each repetition, the authority of these individuals grew stronger. Their influence extended beyond survival into the emotional structure of the group. They represented the bridge between the physical world and the powerful mystery that hovered just beyond perception. In their presence, people felt both protected and exposed, as if standing near a doorway that opened into something vast and terrifying. If this exploration of early spiritual authority sparked any thoughts or reflections in you, leave a comment sharing your perspective. Your insight adds depth to the journey through humanity's earliest beliefs. As these spiritually sensitive individuals shaped the emotional core of early tribes, their influence extended far beyond single moments of fear or intuition. Their presence transformed how knowledge was shared, how experiences were remembered, and how the invisible world was interpreted by the collective mind. When tribes migrated across vast landscapes in search of food, shelter, or safer climates, they carried not only their tools and fire, but also the spiritual impressions shaped by generations before them. Every mountain range crossed, every river followed, and every new territory explored added another layer to the shared understanding of the unseen. Around campfires, where silence held as much weight as movement, the tribe exchanged impressions in a language without words, a flow of gestures, expressions, and emotional cues that preserved the essence of their beliefs. These migrations created a powerful effect, the spread of early spiritual frameworks across different groups. When two tribes encountered each other, even briefly, their rituals, fears, and intuitive interpretations mixed in subtle ways. Gesture that meant protection in one group might be adopted by another simply because it resonated with a universal experience of fear or awe. The spark of intuition, once isolated within a single community, began to travel. Stories without language, expressed through posture, rhythm, and collective behavior, spread across regions. A pattern recognized by one tribe could influence another even miles away, carried through the movement of individuals who joined new groups, shared rituals near fires, or left traces of their traditions in the landscapes they touched. Fires themselves became centers of transmission. Flames offered safety, but they also created moments where the mind drifted beyond practical concerns. As shadows danced and crackled in unpredictable shapes, tribes found meaning in their movements. People used the firelight to reenact moments of danger or intuition, performing gestures that mimicked storms, predators, or unseen presences. These reenactments became powerful emotional memory devices. Children watched and learned, absorbing the symbolic meaning behind these movements long before they understood survival strategies. Through repetition, these shared moments crystallized into traditions. When groups migrated, they recreated these scenes in new territories, blending the memory of old dangers with the realities of unfamiliar landscapes. Spirituality became portable, adapting to each environment while carrying the weight of ancestral experience. Migration also introduced early humans to new natural phenomena that deepened their perception of the unseen. Strange animal behaviors, unexpected echoes in caves, volcanic activity, or the sight of the night sky from unfamiliar angles. All of these experiences fueled the belief that the world was filled with forces waiting to be interpreted. Each encounter added layers of awe and uncertainty, reinforcing the sense that life was guided by powers beyond understanding. As these tribes continued to move, gather, separate, and reunite, spirituality evolved as a dynamic, living structure, shaped by geography, memory, and shared fear. It became the invisible thread stitching together the emotional fabric of early humanity, setting the foundation for the belief systems that would later define entire civilizations. As these migrating groups carried their evolving spiritual impressions across continents, the unseen world began shaping not only emotions and rituals, but the very alliances and conflicts that determined survival. When two tribes met, their relationship depended less on the exchange of resources and more on the invisible frameworks they brought with them. A gesture interpreted as respectful by one group could be mistaken for hostility by another. A ritual performed at the wrong moment or in the wrong way could trigger fear, suspicion, or awe. Spiritual understanding was not a single system. It was a mosaic shaped by geography, memory, and experience. And because every tribe carried its own interpretation of the unseen forces guiding life, these differences influenced whether groups formed bonds or clashed violently. In this era, conflict was rarely random. Many early confrontations began when one tribe perceived that another had disrupted the balance of the unseen world. If a hunt failed after encountering strangers, it was easy to believe those outsiders carried harmful influence. If storms arrived unexpectedly during migration, the blame often fell on unfamiliar groups whose presence seemed to disturb natural rhythms. Conversely, alliances formed when tribes recognized similarities in ritual behavior. If two groups paused before entering certain landscapes or reacted to celestial events with similar gestures, this resonance created a sense of shared understanding. These moments of alignment became the first bridges between cultures. Unity was forged not through language, but through emotional recognition of common spiritual fears. This dynamic shaped the emergence of identity. Tribes defined themselves not only through bloodlines or territory, but through the unseen forces they believed governed their lives. A particular mountain might be considered protective, a certain cave sacred, a specific animal symbolic of guidance or warning. Over generations, these interpretations became markers of who they were. To belong to a group meant participating in its rituals, understanding its signs, and respecting its invisible boundaries. Those who failed to follow these expectations risked being seen as outsiders, even within their own tribe. Spiritual identity became a social glue that held people together while also drawing lines that separated them from others. These early identities influenced decisions that shaped migration routes, settlement patterns, and even technological development. Tribes avoided territories they believed were inhabited by hostile forces, sometimes abandoning fertile areas because the emotional weight of fear outweighed practical opportunity. Others chose to settle near distinctive natural formations, towering cliffs, unusual rock structures, echoing valleys, because these places felt spiritually significant. The environment was no longer just a physical landscape. It had become a symbolic map of meaning. Through this lens, alliances and conflicts were guided by invisible narratives that gave structure to human social behavior. As these dynamics intensified, spirituality became inseparable from the political rhythms of early humanity. Leaders were chosen not only for strength or skill, but for their perceived connection to the unseen. Groups with stronger or more cohesive spiritual frameworks often displayed greater unity, making them more resilient during migration or conflict. Those whose beliefs centered on fear tended to fracture, while those whose beliefs emphasized guidance and protection remained stable. Across generations, spirituality shaped the fate of entire tribes, setting the foundation for the mythologies, priesthoods, and religious authority systems that would eventually dominate ancient civilizations. As early human spiritual frameworks solidified over millennia, what had once been instinctive awareness and intuitive guidance transformed into structured belief systems that shaped entire civilizations. The invisible forces that were once whispers in the minds of the first hominins became foundations for rituals, myths, and moral codes that defined how groups lived, fought, and thrived. Seasonal cycles, celestial events, storms, and the movements of animals were no longer just natural phenomena. They became markers of divine favor, omens, and guidance from powers that governed life itself. Early humans understood that survival depended not only on physical skill but on interpreting the unseen. These interpretations evolved into complex narratives, passed down through generations, guiding decisions about where to hunt, when to migrate, and how to maintain social cohesion. Spiritual awareness had shifted from private intuition to shared cultural reality, creating identity, unity, and meaning across tribes. Figures who had once been intuitive guides now became recognized spiritual authorities. Shamans, seers, or ritual leaders embodied knowledge of the unseen, wielding influence that extended beyond survival. Their words, gestures, and decisions shaped the behavior of entire communities, and their interpretations of natural events reinforced the emotional and moral structures that underpinned tribal life. The power of these early spiritual leaders was not derived from force alone, but from the deep trust their communities placed in their ability to navigate the invisible. Through ritual, storytelling, and collective action, early humans created systems that would eventually evolve into codified religions. Even before written language or formal instruction, the principles of faith, morality, and shared belief were actively shaping human society. The transformation of instinct into spirituality also had profound effects on human consciousness. Awareness of forces beyond immediate perception expanded cognitive and emotional capacities, fostering imagination, memory, empathy, and cooperation. Early humans began to recognize their place in a larger, unseen world, understanding that actions had consequences, not only in the physical realm, but in the spiritual one as well. These lessons were reinforced through ritual, migration, and social learning, embedding spirituality into the fabric of human life. By the time the first symbolic representations, cave paintings, carved talismans, or ritual sites appeared, the groundwork had already been laid. Spirituality was no longer a whisper in the dark, it was a shared experience, a cultural lens through which reality itself was interpreted and navigated. If you followed this journey from the first intuitive whispers to the formation of structured belief systems, consider leaving a comment to share your thoughts or which moment surprised you most. Make sure to hit the like button if this exploration resonated with you, and check that you are subscribed to the channel so you don't miss the continuation of humanity's journey. There's a video linked nearby that explores how these earliest spiritual practices influenced later civilizations in ways that still echo today. Click and continue with me to uncover those connections.